Imagine this. You're reading the Bible, following humanity's first family saga, when suddenly you hit a wall that's puzzled scholars for thousands of years. Genesis chapter 4 verse 17 drops this bombshell. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, what? His wife, where did she come from? If Adam and Eve were humanity's first parents, and their only named sons at this point were Cain and Abel, with Abel being dead, then who exactly did Cain marry? This isn't just some minor biblical footnote. This is a mystery that strikes at the very heart of human origins. And I'm about to show you that the answer is hiding in plain sight, scattered throughout scripture like pieces of an ancient puzzle. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just who Cain's wife was, but why her story, and the stories of countless other forgotten women, reveal something profound about God's plan for humanity. So buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into one of the Bible's most intriguing mysteries. And trust me, the truth is far more fascinating than you might imagine. Let's start with what we know for certain. Genesis gives us the basic family tree. Adam and Eve, the first humans created by God in perfect paradise. They have children. Cain, who becomes a farmer, and Abel, who becomes a shepherd. Then comes the tragic turning point. Cain's offering is rejected while Abel's is accepted. Jealousy consumes Cain, and he commits history's first murder, killing his own brother in a field. God confronts Cain, and here's where things get really interesting. Listen to what Cain says in Genesis 4:14. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Hold on. Whoever finds me, who will kill me? Hold on. Whoever finds me, who exactly is Cain worried about? If the only humans alive are Adam, Eve, and himself, who are these mysterious whoever people? God's response is equally puzzling. Instead of saying, don't worry, there's nobody else out there, God actually validates Cain's fear. He puts a protective mark on Cain and warns that anyone who kills him will face sevenfold vengeance. This suggests that God knew there were other people out there. But who were they? Then, just a few verses later, we get the bombshell. Cain goes to the land of Nod east of Eden and somehow finds a wife. Not only that, but he builds a city, which implies a population large enough to actually inhabit it. This has been driving biblical scholars crazy for centuries. Some have tried to dismiss it as allegory. Others have suggested parallel creation stories, but what if the answer is simpler than we think? What if the Bible actually tells us who these people were? We just haven't been paying attention. Here's where most people miss a crucial detail. We read Genesis like it's telling us about the only children Adam and Eve ever had. But that's not what the text actually says. Genesis 5:4 drops this fascinating nugget. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Think about this logically. Adam lived to be 930 years old according to Scripture. Even if we assume he and Eve didn't start having children until they were expelled from Eden, that still gives them potentially 8,000 years of childbearing. Now, I'm not suggesting they were having babies for 9 centuries straight. But even a fraction of that time could result in dozens, even hundreds of children. And if those children were also living for several centuries and having their own children, the math is staggering. By the time Cain was exiled, there could have been thousands of people on earth, all descendants of Adam and Eve. But here's the kicker. The Bible doesn't name most of them. Why? Because the biblical narrative isn't trying to give us a complete census of early humanity. It's following specific bloodlines that are crucial to God's redemptive plan. The Bible is laser focused on the lineage that leads to Noah, to Abraham, to David, and ultimately to Jesus Christ. Everyone else, including most of the daughters, becomes background to this central story. But that doesn't mean they weren't there. It doesn't mean they weren't important. It just means their stories aren't the main plot line Scripture is following. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wait a minute. Are you suggesting Cain married his sister? Isn't that problematic? And you're right to ask, by today's standards, marriage between siblings raises serious genetic concerns. But we're not talking about today's standards. We're talking about today's standards. We're talking about the very beginning of human history. First, let's address the genetic issue. The problems we associate with close relative marriages today: increased risk of genetic disorders, birth defects, and other complications. These arise from generations of accumulated genetic mutations and weaknesses. But Adam and Eve were created perfect. Their genetic code was pristine, undamaged by the effects of sin and time. Their immediate descendants would have inherited this genetic purity. It would have taken many generations for the kind of genetic deterioration that makes close relative marriages dangerous. Second, this was actually necessary for survival. If all of humanity descended from one couple, then the first generation had no choice but to marry within the family. It wasn't a moral failing. It was a mathematical necessity. And here's something fascinating. The Bible itself acknowledges this reality. Even centuries later, we see examples of close relative marriages being not just acceptable, but blessed by God. Abraham married his half-sister Sarah. Isaac married his cousin Rebekah. Jacob married his cousins Leah and Rachel. These weren't scandalous relationships. They were covenant marriages that carried God's blessing. It wasn't until the time of Moses, roughly 2,500 years after Adam and Eve, that God instituted laws prohibiting marriage between close relatives. By then, the human population had grown substantially, and the genetic risks had become real concerns. But in the beginning, it was simply the way things had to be. So who were these forgotten daughters? What were their names? What were their stories? The canonical Bible doesn't tell us, but that hasn't stopped people from wondering. Ancient Jewish texts, like the Book of Jubilees, attempt to fill in some of these gaps. While these aren't considered inspired scripture by most Christians and Jews, they do offer fascinating glimpses into how ancient peoples understood these stories. According to Jubilees, Adam and Eve had daughters named Oan and Azura. Oan supposedly became Cain's wife, while Azura married Seth. These texts paint them as strong, faithful women who played crucial roles in humanity's early development. But whether or not we accept these specific names, the broader point remains. There were women in the early world whose stories we don't know, whose names we don't remember, but whose lives were absolutely essential to the continuation of human civilization. Think about it. Every single person who has ever lived can trace their lineage back to these unnamed daughters of Adam and Eve. They were the mothers of nations, the grandmothers of civilizations, the great-great-grandmothers of every prophet, king, and saint in biblical history. Yet most of us don't even know they existed. This raises profound questions about how we read Scripture. How many other important figures are hidden in the margins? How many crucial stories are left untold because they don't fit the main narrative thread? And what does this tell us about how God values the forgotten, the unnamed, the overlooked? Here's what I find most fascinating about this mystery. It's not really about Cain's wife at all. It's about how we understand the nature of Scripture itself. The Bible isn't a comprehensive history textbook. It's not trying to document every person who ever lived or every event that ever happened. It's a selective narrative with a specific purpose: to reveal God's character and His plan for human redemption. When we understand this, suddenly the mystery of Cain's wife becomes much less mysterious. Of course, there were other people. Of course, Cain found a wife. The Bible just doesn't spend time on details that aren't central to its main message. But this also means we need to read Scripture with both confidence and humility. Confidence because what it does tell us is absolutely trustworthy. Humility because there's so much more to the story than what's recorded on the page. And maybe that's the point. Maybe God left some mysteries unsolved to remind us that His ways are higher than our ways, His thoughts higher than our thoughts. Maybe the unnamed daughters of Adam and Eve represent all the unnamed, unsung heroes of faith whose stories we'll only fully understand in eternity. So where does this leave us? What's the takeaway from this ancient mystery? First, it reminds us that God's plan is bigger than we can imagine. The Bible follows specific bloodlines for specific purposes, but that doesn't mean everyone else was forgotten or unimportant. Every person who ever lived, named or unnamed, has played a role in the grand story of humanity. Second, it challenges us to read Scripture more thoughtfully. When we encounter apparent contradictions or mysteries, maybe the answer isn't that the Bible is wrong. Maybe we just need to dig deeper, think more carefully, and consider what the text is actually trying to tell us. Third, it gives us hope. If God can use unnamed daughters, forgotten siblings, overlooked individuals to accomplish his purposes, then he can certainly use us. Our stories matter, even if they never make it into history books. The mystery of Cain's wife isn't really a mystery at all. It's a reminder that God's story is vast. A mystery at all. It's a reminder that God's story is vast. What do you think? Does this explanation make sense to you? And each of us has a part to play in it. What do you think? Does this explanation make sense to you? Have you wondered about other biblical mysteries that might have some? And if this video helped us put you in a new light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into biblical mysteries. Because trust me, there are plenty more where this came from, Thanks for watching. Remember, sometimes the most important things are in plain sight.